Facilities and Technology Committee. Um, Happy Wednesday, everybody. And Beth, if you could start by taking the roll call, please.
Yes, trustee Cates,
Here.
trustee Riley,
Yes.
trustee Flood,
Here.
trustee Michaud,
Here.
trustee McMahon,
Present.
trustee Alexander.
Here.
You're all set.
Excellent. I don't see, is President Edmondson on the screen yet?
Roger, she has an appointment and she may be late, but
Oh,
she'll.
I'm
Okay.
here. I just always write at 9. I just don't join a Zoom many minutes early. I apologize. Here I am.
No, no, it
Okay,
wasn't.
trustee Kane, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And also, I think we have also present, if I'm not mistaken, is Clyde here? Clyde Mitchell. Hi, Clyde. Clyde, our faculty rep. Thanks for being here. I don't think we have any student reps present this morning. So we'll go right into our agenda then. The first item on the agenda, these next couple of things are ones we do once a year, and this is the time when we hear the FY25 philanthropy overview from both Jeff Mills, President and CEO of the UM Foundation, and Corey Haskell, President and CEO of USM Foundation. Before we start, I just wanted to say congratulations and thank you to Jeff. I understand you are retiring after many years. 2012, I think you took on this position at the foundation. You've done obviously an incredible job. I think your endowment has more than doubled since you were there. So thanks for all your work. No one is irreplaceable, but it's going to be hard to fill your shoes. So
Well,
thank you
very
and we're
much. I appreciate
glad
it.
to welcome you for our last meeting. And Corey, welcome as well. I don't know how the two of you have decided to proceed, but go ahead.
All right, thank you,
Good morning.
everyone. I just want to add my congratulations to Jeff Mills. Jeff and the folks at the UMaine Foundation could not be better partners to the USM Foundation, and frankly to all of the UMaine system campuses. I'm really going to miss him. Jeff, I'm really going to miss you. It's been wonderful to get to work with you.
Thank you. I'll still be around in Maine and everything else, but thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, well, let's dig in. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right, great. I think most of you know this, but the USM Foundation is young in its iteration. It was legally created in 1996 when USM had an Office of University Advancement and wanted to have a foundation to accept certain kinds of gifts. But in 2017, the decision was made by President Cummings and one of my predecessors, George Campbell, to move the staff from the Office of University Advancement at USM into the USM Foundation. And in 2017, we were born as a fully staffed organization. We are an independent 501c3 nonprofit, and we are tied with strings of love to USM, despite the fact that we are separate. Our offices are on the Portland campus, and we have had record-breaking fundraising in FY25, and also looking ahead at this year that we're coming to a close in FY26, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. So I don't think it is a surprise that one of the biggest things that's been happening at USM is this year and last year, and frankly for many years and decades, is the Crew Center for the Arts. This is a 3-decade long dream for the Osher School of Music at USM, for our visual arts, our dance, and our theater programs to have a home. And so in October, we officially cut the ribbon in the presence of Chancellor Malloy and many of the trustees, including Trustee Riley, Governor Mills, Congresswoman Shelley Pingree, some of our most important philanthropy partners, including Tom and Kate Chappell, Tony Shalhoub, who's also a USM alum, and of course, Dan Crew. For those of you that were there, I can only call that day a triumph for USM. It was an amazing day, made possible by so many people, including all of you, and in particular, the Chancellor and trustees, Riley and Cates. I just can't say thank you enough for your support. The idea of opening the Crew Center for the Arts, although it's been around for decades, it really was catalyzed with your support. Over 900 people registered to attend this event, which made it the biggest event on the Portland campus in decades. It was just a wonderful day. And I know Jackie's not here, but she would want me to say, she said, it was the most meaningful professional day for her in her career. And so thanks to you. So when I was here last year reporting out on philanthropy at the USM Foundation, we talked a little bit, or I talked a little bit about the fact that we had closed the Great University campaign at the end of June in 2023, which at the time, oh, President Edmondson is here. Hello, President. At the time was the biggest campaign in USM history, hugely successful. We wrapped it up in 3 years instead of 5 and raised $50 million. In higher ed philanthropy, you are either in a campaign, you're just coming out of a campaign, or you're preparing to go into a campaign. And we are preparing for our next big thing. We're preparing for a future USM campaign. So what are we doing in the in-between years? Obviously, we're working very hard to close our capital project fundraising, including the Crew Center for the Arts, the Collab Sports Arena on the Gorham campus, and our Steinway piano fundraising. We're also working at the USM Foundation to increase our run rate. So in FY19, the year before we officially launched the Great University campaign, the USM Foundation raised $7.2 million. That was a record-breaking year for USM fundraising. And we knew that when we closed the Great University campaign in June of 2023, we were going to need to look ahead to future years of consistently increasing our fundraising for USM year over year. And I'm going to talk with you a little bit about that in a couple of minutes. Pipeline building in the in-between years is important, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Building our endowment, same thing. I'm going to tell you more about this momentarily. Also in the in-between years, we are working to leverage smaller philanthropic campaigns. So that includes things like the promised $10 million for 10 years campaign. In 2027, the Promise Scholars Program at USM turns 10 years old. And we solicited a $5 million trust gift from a Promise supporter who wants that trust gift to be used as a challenge to the USM community in honor of Promise's 10-year anniversary. And so we're halfway there. We're actually at $6 million for our 10-year anniversary, and we'll continue working to close that gap this year. In the in-between times, between campaigns, the USM Foundation is also working to master the fundamentals. So what do I mean by that? For those of you that have been around philanthropy in the humane system over the past few years and decades, you'll know that USM did not always have a strong philanthropy operation. Back in the day, philanthropy at USM was like a couple $1 million, $3-4 million a year endeavor. And so when we launched the USM Foundation in 2017, we knew that we needed to create something at USM that had never existed before. And that is one of the reasons why we launched right into a big campaign. There was lots of pent-up energy, people in the state of Maine that were wanting USM to do well after many years of maybe not. And so since the Great University campaign, the USM Foundation is really working to become a best practice philanthropy shop. So we're not just all charisma and leveraging the pent-up donor energy. We actually need to be able to raise $10 to $15 million for USM every single year outside of campaigns. That is what we need to do. And so the USM Foundation is working to master the fundamentals and become a best practice shop. And then finally, in terms of bridging campaigns, we're working to create a culture of philanthropy at USM. Because philanthropy hasn't always been a big center of excellence at USM, there's a learning curve for sure. How do we partner more meaningfully with departments and programs and get everyone involved in philanthropy? We have a great partner in President Edmondson. And I know that we're on the road to ensuring that the entire university understands, values, and actively supports fundraising and donor relationships. So building momentum. Last year when I was here, I reported that the USM Foundation was on track to break a new fundraising record for USM. As I mentioned earlier, in FY19, the year before the campaign, we raised $7.3 million. In FY24 and 5 and 6, we were hoping to increase our run rate. So the amount that we raise every single year. So last year, FY25, we raised $10.5 million for USM. This year in FY26, at the close of the third quarter, we were already at $12 million raised. So we're looking at increasing our run rate slowly. We've solicited 2 new $5 million trust gifts this year, which we're looking to document. And we've also, I think most importantly to you, made strong progress in capital project fundraising this fiscal year and last fiscal year. Entering FY26, we had a $5 million delta for the Crew Center for the Arts project. We've closed that and we have $1.6 million remaining. We had a huge month of March. The Collab Esports Arena on the Gorham campus, we cut a ribbon on that new arena in the fall as well. When we started the fiscal year, we had $588,000 still to go on fundraising for the arena. We've got $142,000 left as we're closing in on the end of the fiscal year. And then finally, the Steinway pianos that you all approved. The USM Foundation has raised over $2 million for the Steinway project in less than a year. So we've got less than $800,000 left to go. And we're excited to close all 3 of those capital projects in the coming months. So one of the important things that the USM Foundation has been focused on is campaign readiness. Last year, when I spoke with you, I talked about the fact that we were moving swiftly towards a future campaign. We decided to take a beat and actually do some due diligence and think through whether we were ready and what we do to become ready. So we engaged our friends at CCS Fundraising Consulting. We've worked with them on all of USM's fundraising campaigns, and they did an analysis and some interviews with the cabinet, the USM Foundation board, and the USM Foundation. And they came back with 5 recommendations for things that the USM Foundation and USM need to do in order to get campaign ready. And so these are the 5 things that are going to be keeping us busy. The first one, we've already talked about: complete existing capital projects. That seems obvious before we launch our next campaign. Second one is to be working very closely with President Edmondson and the cabinet to ensure that we're taking the president's vision for the future and turning that into campaign priorities that will take USM to its next big chapter. We're also very focused on growing our endowment. The UMaine Foundation is an amazing example for us. Our endowment has grown a lot since the USM Foundation was created in 2017. It's at $62 million right now, and our goal is to hit 100 million by the end of 2034. And so the next campaign will certainly have a strong endowment component. Third campaign readiness recommendation, and this is one of the most important from my perspective: identify and cultivate new 7- and 8-figure campaign prospects. So USM has benefited from the support of major philanthropists who really care about public higher ed in Maine, and you recognize their names: Osher, Wishcamper, McGoldrick, Sheldon, Crew. And I will say to you that going into the Great University campaign, $21 million of our $50 million fundraising was secured through 3 donors. 2 of them have passed away, Susie Osher, Peter Sheldon. And in order to launch a fundraising campaign at USM that is bigger than the last campaign, which is always our goal, we need to identify the next generation of transformational donors that support USM. And the USM Foundation is laser focused on that. Fourth campaign recommendation is to expand our volunteer and future campaign leadership. There is no one like Dan Crew. Dan Crew was our campaign chair for the Great University campaign and also the chair of the USM Foundation board. And if I could duplicate him, I would. But we need to have someone and a number of people that are ready to be ambassadors in philanthropy for USM. And the USM Foundation has got an outstanding board, but they're terming off, and they've all are starting to hit their 9-year term limits. And so they're very focused on leadership succession and creating a board at the USM Foundation that can caretake the legacy that this originating board has created. So the 5th and final campaign readiness recommendation is really just making sure that we're strengthening our momentum by resourcing the team. And President Edmondson and the cabinet at USM has been very supportive of the USM Foundation and very supportive of philanthropy. And we simply could not do the kind of transformational fundraising for USM that we've been doing without their support. And we expect that to continue. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but what I'd like you to know is that in this in-between time, we're really focused on cultivating the next era of philanthropic leaders for USM, because my job is to care for USM today, tomorrow, and forever. And so today donors are annual givers, and we need to build a stronger annual giving pipeline. Tomorrow givers are those major gift givers. And then forever is another place where we need to focus in. They're those 7- and 8-figure donors who make transformational gifts, who make planned gifts, who make gifts that will boost our endowment. And so we're very focused on uncovering those. So looking ahead, we'll be building the pipeline of entry-level donors and also 7- and 8-figure donors. We'll be working closely with the president on her vision for the future and IDing priorities that help her advance that vision. We'll be working to gauge donor energy for those priorities. And also, as I said, focusing on the endowment. And we'll know we're ready for a feasibility study to launch our next campaign when we've accomplished our 5 campaign readiness recommendations. And as I mentioned earlier, our endowment goal at the USM Foundation is to boost our endowment to $100 million by 2034. We have a great model in the Humane Foundation with Jeff Mills and his team's great work. And so we're looking forward to helping to take some of the financial pressure off of USM in the long term by building our endowment. So what questions do you have? Or maybe I should turn it over to Jeff and he'll ask us questions at the end. Trustee Kate, how do you want to handle that?
Sure. Why don't we do that? Thank you, Corey, very much for your presentation. Jeff,
Sure.
why don't you go ahead and then we can entertain questions of either of you. Thanks. Jeff, are you there? There you go. Okay, thank you. Jeff, are you there? If you were speaking, we can't hear you.
We're
Also,
just,
Jeff, I think
we're-
that's the wrong screen.
Yeah.
is that why? Okay. let me try again.
You're sharing, I think, the wrong screen.
All right, I'll try going back.
Right.
Thanks. I think we're almost there.
Okay, we're viewing your inbox. I see
Maybe-
there's a good discounts on Allegiant flights, so I've written that down.
The best made plans. Just a second. I
Sure.
think we've got them here.
Okay.
Later on, Jeff, we can follow up and I'll tell you how to use AI to clean up your desktop.
Yes, that will be greatly appreciated. Just a second. I've stopped sharing my screen and now we're going to try to.
There we go.
All right. Thank you all for being here today and once again for our annual review. And so we will move forward with our next slide. There we go. There I am. So one of the interesting things about doing these each year is that you have some people that have seen them several times and have a lot of knowledge about us, and then you have newer ones. So we try to give a mix of both. So stay here. I'm just making sure that we have a chance to go over those with you. So we were established in 1934. We're one of the oldest private foundations at a public institution, over 90 years old, independent 501c3, 2 locations in Orono and also in the wonderful Portland Grad Center that you see on the screen, and record-breaking fundraising for FY25. Sometimes people ask, why do a lot of public institutions have private foundations? It's to allow them to do some things that you would not be able to do as a public entity, particularly bond issues, raising money for those. Often we have donors that want to be anonymous donors. So you have certain things that make it more nimble for us to many times. We've had cases where the university has wanted to have a lease in a particular area. They've asked the foundation to go in and do the lease, because if you had to go through the entire public process, many times those facilities would already be gone by the time we would be able to get through a public piece to be able to do that. So before we transfer it over to them. So things like that that are helpful, that make it more nimble and to allow us to be able to do things for the institution. And our next slide is stuck for some reason. We'll just, here we go again. I don't know why I've got my person here too helping me. So between the two of us, you would think we'd be able to do it, but hopefully we'll go.
What about the arrows down in the bottom left, Jeff?
There we go. There we go. One of my favorite things is always to talk about how we are a research land grant, sea grant institution. And then the next thing I know, I can't have my slides work. So it's always an interesting thing with that. So our 6-year giving trend, we were asked, as you know, by the university and the university system to try to combine all of the fundraising pretty much under one roof. It's something that had been worked on for 4 decades. I had even worked on it when I was a vice president at the university before I left to go to New Jersey. And since that time period, with doing most of that now, it has been a tremendous success with the fundraising that we've had. You can see the 6-year totals. One of the questions that always comes up is, well, how much of that is the Alfond money? If we didn't have the Alfond money, we'd be averaging instead of next slide. Instead of the 400% increase, it would be about a 300% increase instead. But I always like to say, of course, we count the Alfond money because those are grants. They're not outright gifts. We don't receive the Alfond money unless we match it with fundraising, with philanthropy. But it's just been a tremendous increase across the nation. We've been recognized for it, and it's just great news for all of us with the increase. Next. Same thing with our endowment. Trustee Katz mentioned earlier, it's been tremendous growth with our endowment. You kind of look for the sweet spot with fundraising, with endowment versus non-endowment. You always have people that will say we should have more endowment. You always have people that say we should have less endowment. We need more money now. Usually you try for about a 2/3, 1/3, 1/3 endowment, 2/3 now. And we've been hitting about that sweet spot most years. So it's really worked well for us. It's because we're building for the future, but also trying to meet today's needs, which are always more pressing all the time. So that's kind of the balance that we try to aim for as we continue to move with that. So a lot of people, when you see such tremendous growth, you wonder, what's the process? How does that work? We have a tremendous group that works first off with our CFO, Kevin Frazier, does a tremendous job. We are very similar with our setup as you are at the University of Maine trustees with your investment committee. We have our investment consultant. Ours is Prime Buckholz out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. They keep trying to work their way up to Maine. They're getting close. They're just over the bridge. So they have many national universities, including some local ones, the University of New Hampshire, the University of Vermont. They've been excellent for us to work with. We've been very pleased with that. We have an excellent, really worked hard on the investment committee and getting experts on that committee, and we continue to see that. Right now, our chair is Jim Gary, who is with the Glickman Foundation as their CFO. He used to be for many, many years with the Maine Community Foundation. Chris Keating was chair before that, our current board chair. Just before him was Bob Strong, who is our distinguished Maine professor, former finance faculty member here at the University of Maine, and also the chair of Bangor Savings Bank for many, many years. But probably the person that helped me the most when I came back to UMaine and stayed with us all the way up through and was the chair for most of our time period was Hank Smelzer. And unfortunately, Hank just passed away with a very quick illness this past year. But he, having been the CEO of the Maine Community Foundation for many, many years, outstanding alum, and just really helped us to build our investment committee with many great members over the years. We use the NACUBO, which is the National Association of College and University Business Officers group, and their survey to set up to make sure that what we're investing in is, as far as your risk to reward, is a national level, so that the returns that we're getting will not be at quite as much risk in a downturn, but we use those national standards. We are very fortunate to have Ryan as a member of our investment committee. He usually delegates that role to the CBO at the campus, and we've had Kelly Sparks attending in the past in that role, and also Joanne Yastrzemski, and been very helpful to have with our committee. So we're very fortunate to have that also with the connection to the university and the system. The university president, Joan Freni-Mundy, will tell you every single board meeting, we have a substantial agenda item of the investment committee. It's a major part of our agenda each time we have our board meeting, and we go over where we are, what we're investing in, all of those pieces for everybody to have the opportunity. And then your trustee members for the foundation attend every year the annual meeting. Trustee Riley, Kane, Martin, also President Freni-Mundy. When we have our annual meeting, we do our presentation from our investment committee chair, and then also Prime Buckholz gets up and does the presentation for all of our investments for everybody in an open process at the meeting, and then also talks about where we're going to go for our investments over the next years, and we have questions and answer time period after that. We also, for transparency, each quarter post to our website our investment asset allocation and performance and market values for everybody to see, and also our investment policy statement is there. So it's really been a great, when you look at the fundraising, you look at what's happened. A lot of times people just talk about fundraising. The investment portfolio, I would argue, is as important a job for all of us that are in these areas as is the fundraising. Both of those things combined are what really gets you to where you need to be able to be functioning as a good foundation or other groups that are doing fundraising. And we have such great support. Next one. As you probably saw, the Boston Globe and also the Portland Press Herald did stories about the fact that our increase in endowment and investment return and all of that was some of the best in the country, beating out many institutions that are in Boston that you might know of that are private institutions and others. So we were very proud of all of that. And in that article, you probably saw that we talked about both the increase in payovers and everything is because we've had such tremendous fundraising with a tremendous team of everybody from the chancellor, the president, as I said in the article, all the way down to the deans and our wonderful staff. Can't say enough particularly about my senior level staff, Kevin Frazier, our CFO, Sarah McPartland Good, Pat Cummings, Joyce Kennedy, Liz Erickson, Winnie Cashy. I'd stack them up against anybody anywhere in the country for senior staff. We are so fortunate to have them, and it really is a team effort with all of those items. So we're very proud of seeing that recognition out there. As you know, we also received recognition by having us placed on the two major fundraising groups nationally are the Council for Advancement and Supportive Education and also the Association of Governing Boards. And we have representation. We were placed with my being a member of both of those now. So that's been awesome to have also with that recognition. And we also received from CASE the highest individual award that you can receive for a CEO in the foundation management area. Next. So in summary, all-time high in annual fundraising, all-time high in endowment totals, and one of the highest returns in university endowments across the country. Really, really pleased. Again, team effort with everybody working so hard with all of these items. By any measurement, the greatest fundraising year in the University of Maine and the University of Maine system history. Thank you.
Jeff, thanks very much. Why don't we open up for questions now of both Jeff and Corey that members may have. Yes, President Freeney Monday, good morning.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a question, but I just want to personally and publicly here thank Jeff Mills for his extraordinary leadership in the foundation, for his fantastic collaboration with the university. And he was pretty humble about it, but being named to these two national boards is a very big deal. And I'm so pleased that he's able to represent Maine nationally in these ways. And fantastic work. I just wanted to say that to this group. Thank you, Jeff.
One more thing I would like to say is it has one of the things that's been very interesting about the Transforms piece and is that with President Freeney Monday taking the lead, the Chancellor and others, is that contract really got us to work more as a system. And so I really didn't know the head of the law school foundation before really, and knew of them but didn't work with them, and also same thing with USM. And so it's been great to work with Corey and Chris Haley when he was at the law school, along with Lee Softly, Jackie, all of us working together much more as a system, not with the system fundraising, so to speak, but on the projects that we all have and still keeping our identity for what we do with our own campuses, but working very well together. So very, very fortunate to have had that grant, and it's really helped us to be able to work together as all of us at the different groups with our foundations.
Thank you. Questions? Jeff, I've got a couple if I could. First of all, your excellent investment return. I know I've spoken with Trustee McMahon about this before as well, but what do you attribute that? Are you willing to take on a little more risk than perhaps others are, or why the outstanding investment return?
Yeah, I'd say we pretty much have stayed in the same level, the national average for what our portfolio looks like. I would say the biggest thing is the amount of time that and effort that everybody puts into it. We're in regular contact with Prime Buckles. Our board, our investment committee chair and other members of the committee we're emailing back and forth constantly over reactions that are happening in the markets, whether we need to adjust or not. Usually the answer is not to adjust, but I would just say that a lot of it is just having due diligence and really great people that we are working with as a team.
Thanks. And do you have an idea, just for comparison purposes, off the top of your head, the endowments of, say, UNH and UVM, our neighbors to the south?
Yeah, we'll be doing the analysis again pretty soon. UVM's a little bit of an outlier because they have a med school, so it's been a little bit different. We traditionally have been much lower than a lot of the other institutions, and now we're pretty on the par with UNH and other areas now. The last few years, also on our annual fundraising, we've raised more than they have, which is good because if you look at the analysis that we do all the time for the amount of employees that we have and budgets are much less. So, but I can get you a little bit more. When you look at the state of Maine, we usually do the analysis of that, even though it's not apples to apples in many ways. Bowdoin is by far way ahead. Colby second. And then third has usually been either us or Bates, right at the same level, which is kind of interesting. And then you have to drop down from there about 400 million to get to the next institutions in the state. But we will be doing the analysis soon on the New England's again. So we'll give you the update for that before we do it at our annual meeting.
Thank you. Thanks. Trustee Flood.
Thank you, Trustee Cates. I just had a fairly specific question for either Corey or Jackie. It sounded like we still had about $800,000 to go to raise for the Steinways in this year's effort. And then at kind of toward the end of it, it sounded like when you were presenting, Corey, that it didn't. You were confident, I guess, in that at getting that $800,000. Could you just reflect on that and how that is going? Either one of you, and thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Raising $2 million in a year for Steinway pianos, at least in Steinway, the Steinway Company's experience, was highly unusual. And the Steinway Company invited Jackie and the chair of the Osher School of Music to come to New York City to talk about how we were able to raise so much money in so little time. So I do feel confident that we're going to close that gap. We do, and I've said this a couple of times here, we do have a lot of arts fundraising on our plates. And there's a lot of arts fundraising happening in the ecosystem in Greater Portland. And I believe in our ability to get that done. I don't like to make promises that I 100% can't keep, so I try not to do it. But I'll tell you, we're going to work real hard and close that up in FY27.
I think thank you, Corey. And that's all accurate and true, of course. And I think the other thing I would add is that the Steinway people that we've been working with told us from the outset that when the Steinways were in the Crew Center for the Arts, the likelihood of raising funds is much higher. And we have seen that when people see the students playing the pianos, when they hear the quality of the instruments, it really makes a difference, and they understand that our students deserve to have access to these quality pianos. And so I've been really encouraged by and grateful for the number of people who've come forward to support that initiative. And the other thing that I love about it is that people are naming pianos. And so there will be plaques on the pianos that have the names of the people who donated the money for them. So the students will always know that there were people who believed in them and invested in them. And I think as more people see those plaques and understand how meaningful it is for our students to know for decades to come that there was this investment in them and a belief that they deserved the very best pianos possible in this beautiful facility. I have every confidence we'll be able to close that gap. And I am grateful to the USM Foundation for all they did to make that happen and to raise over $2 million in just a year. It's just been a remarkable story. And Steinway wants, of course, other universities to do what we're doing. So it was great to be there and to talk with folks about this initiative.
Thanks to you both.
Thank you. Any other questions? So President Edmondson, just want to once again congratulate you. I understand that last night you received an award as one of Maine's 7 business leaders of the year. So again, congratulations, and hope that went well for you.
Thank you so much. I couldn't do it without all of you. So thank you.
She gave a great speech too. Audra, I was there, Joan was there, Corey was there. She gave a great speech too about USM and all that's going on. And it was a very proud UMaine system moment last night.
Terrific. Yes, Ryan.
I just wanted to provide just a bit of context before we shift on to Darla.
Yep.
So for the folks that haven't been here for a while, we've always done Darla's report as part of this kind of annual piece. And for a number of years, that was all we did. And so you can imagine we'd get questions from trustees about, well, what's going on with the foundations and all of that. So we added in Jeff and originally Ainsley and now Corey into this as a regular update for you. This last July, you approved a capital campaign for the law school. So when we roll into next year and do this report again, we'll include Lee and the team at the law school as part of the updates that we provide you as well. These were all meant to show you the things that happen outside of the UMS specific funds, because that's really only giving you just a really small view. And so that's the idea behind the presentation and how our plans to expand it just a little bit more next year.
Thank you. So if there are no further questions, and I'm not seeing any, again, thank you, Corey, so much for being with us, and Jeff, and wishing you all the best in your next chapter in your life. And we'll move on to tab 2 in our materials, the FY25 annual report on gifts, fundraising, and endowments that Ryan just mentioned. Darla Reynolds, Director of Accounting. We're running a little behind, but I'm sure we'll be able to make up the time. Darla, good morning.
Good morning. And as it turns out, I have a 5-minute presentation or a 1 minute. So I'm assuming you'd like me to go with the 1 minute?
The 5 minute, you can, how about 4.5?
Okay. Just a moment and I'll share my screen. Hopefully you can all see the presentation. So good morning, everyone. And this report is actually in tab 2 of the materials, and I'll continue to display. And I'll just mention a couple of highlights, as I know you've had a chance to read the report, and it's pretty standard in its format and content with the reports that have been presented in prior years. So if I were to sum up the report in one sentence, it would be this: FY25 reflects solid philanthropic performance, strong endowment growth, and continued donor confidence, with giving concentrated in student support, facilities, and other strategic priorities across the system. Whoops. For the University of Maine system itself, FY25 gifts totaled $37 million. As you can see, that's down from $45 million in the prior year. But the year-over-year decline is largely explained by an unusually large amount of restricted gifts received in FY24 tied to construction at USM, the Crew Center for the Arts, to be more specific. Now, as shown on slide 5, giving continues to be overwhelmingly donor restricted, with 99% of the FY25 gifts restricted for a particular purpose. And in terms of where donors want to invest, student aid continues to be a top choice. And for FY25, facilities was a close second. Now, just as important as annual flow is the balance sheet, which we see on slide 7. And as of June 30th, 2025, total UMS gift-related balances reached $262 million, up $20 million from the prior year, with half of that growth related to endowment balances and nearly half related to gift balances. Now, part 2 of the report, covering slides 9 through 11, provides information on gifts and outstanding gift balances related to the university system's many affiliated fundraising organizations. And on slide 10, you can see what those organizations are. Their total gifts received for FY25 grew by $6 million, or 10% from the prior year, with that growth being primarily at the University of Maine Foundation and the University of Southern Maine Foundation. These same two foundations also account for the $83 million growth in endowment market values that we see on slide 11. And I won't turn to part 3, which talks about the campaigns, as there are no active campaigns at the moment. But as Corey mentioned earlier, and Jeff as well, both foundations are very busy fundraising for various construction projects and other endeavors, even though there isn't a formal campaign. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee may have. And let me stop sharing.
Thank you, Darla. Here we are. Questions people have? I can't see everybody on the screen, so if I don't call on you, please just go ahead and speak up. Darla, maybe, I'm not sure you're the right person, but could you talk a little bit about efforts to kind of clean up some of the restricted gifts that may be for specific scholarship purposes that no longer apply? I don't know if there was a scholarship for people to learn how to cut ice on rivers, you know, some purpose which clearly no longer applies in our modern society. Could you talk a bit about that?
I know there have been efforts over the past few years to utilize the balances. I think a couple of CBOs ago at USM, I know over a couple of years there was concerted effort to try and use some of the gift monies in order to provide relief to the E&G budget. And I know we've worked on occasion with people from the USM Foundation that are trying to do that very thing of, you know, this fund description currently makes this gift too restricted, or we don't have the type of student that is specified. So working with the donor or the state of Maine in order to change the language a bit so that the university can more easily utilize the funds.
Okay, thank you. Other questions on this section? I'm not seeing any. So Dara, again, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
We'll now move on to the materials at tab 3, which is the FY27 University of Maine system budget. We've certainly gone over in some detail the budgets of each of the respective universities. This is the system budget, and Ryan Lowe is with us to walk us through that. Morning.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's grab my PowerPoint. Okay, if I've done everything right, hopefully you're seeing my screen right now. So first of all, want to thank everyone for all the work to get us to this point. I typically start off all of these kind of budget review sessions thanking the CBOs and the presidents and the campus community and all of that, and certainly all of that applies. And I'll do that again when I ask you to vote on this budget at the end of April, and I'll do it again in May because they deserve that credit. But for this one right here, I'll reserve all the credit to two folks in my office, Angela Michoud, who does everything in my office, and Miriam White. Both of them, we've probably had a dozen meetings since our first kind of all-day session. All of them, kind of gathering up information, getting ready for this session. A little historical background on this session. We did not have this meeting on our schedule up until just a few years ago. And what we found, and I remember spending a lot of time talking with Chair Riley about this when she was chairing FFT and Jim Donnelly before that and others, is that we would present a lot to the trustees. We'd present a $600 million budget to you in March, and some of you would be there for that hearing, and some of you wouldn't. And then we'd ask you to show up at the very next meeting and vote on that budget. And if you're a trustee that wasn't on FFT, in some cases you'd show up in May, and that might be the first time that you saw the budget or had a chance to ask questions or anything. And so we added this meeting, kind of the equivalent of our version of an appropriations committee work session, where we would just flag all of the items and questions that you brought up at the March session, questions that came up in other settings, and then kind of dedicate this meeting to just really going through and answering those questions. And so sometimes this meeting takes 3 hours, and sometimes it takes an hour, depending on the questions that you have and how well we do in answering them. So with that, I'm gonna jump right in and start going over the slides. This is the FY27 budget review, obviously. There is no action today. This is really a working session ahead of your April 29th FFT meeting, where you'll be asked to approve the FY27 budget and then advance that on to the full board. So we took all the great questions that you asked us in March and largely have condensed them down into 4 buckets. Reserves, we want to talk a little bit about reserves at the system level. The campus reserves you saw as part of the individual campus budget presentations. We want to talk about shared services and governance. It's the biggest section that you're going to hear from today, representing nearly $60 million in combined expenditures in that category. We're going to talk about state appropriation, both the how much is coming in and how that flow works. And then we're going to give you kind of the face of the credit hour. We had lots of questions about headcount versus FTEs versus how many people, how many of that total headcount, how many are on a campus, how many are online, and so we dissected those out with tremendous help from the campuses, and look forward to sharing those with you as well. So I'm going to start right off with reserves. The committee asked us during the last cycle for kind of a clearer picture of where the system holds reserves and how those are managed. We're going to cover that over the next 2 or 3 slides. So this is a slide that we used last year, really just highlighting the value of reserves, of that unrestricted net position, to give us that ability to act in a financial cushion. To give us that cushion when the economy goes down, or to make strategic investments that we need to make along the way. And we have a couple of different buckets of reserves, and depending on which one of those we're looking to do. So sorry, just organizing my notes here. So again, two main kind of buckets that we'll focus on right here. So again, on the right side, you'll see campus reserves. They're usually in a couple of different buckets. A mini budget stabilization fund, maybe some operating reserves, capital planning reserves. Because remember, one of the first things the chancellor did when he came in was that we kind of changed we changed the rule on how capital planning reserves work. And if we allocate funds for capital planning in the budget and a campus doesn't spend them in a particular year, those roll over into a reserve automatically and need to be spent on capital. We had a long history of budgeting for capital, not spending that money and then using it for something else. And so that's a positive change that we've made. We're seeing the results of that already. Specific campus numbers were part of the budget presentations that you saw in March. For the system, we have basically four pools of reserves, but we're really just going to focus on really two. The what we refer to as the budget stabilization reserve, or the budget stabilization fund, and the unified operating reserve. We do maintain other reserves for really specific purposes, and you can see that right here for benefit pool funds, for risk management reserves, for when we need to make payments for for some kind of accident or something that has happened where we're required to pay, we can leverage that. But again, the big one that we're going to focus on is budget stabilization fund and the operating reserve. So this is the 16-year window of the budget stabilization fund. I'll go back to 2010 and give credit to former Vice Chancellor Weick, who established the original budget stabilization fund with Miriam's great work, and seeded that with $5 million. Kind of the original goal, for some of you who were with me in state government at that time will remember, we were doing curtailments in state government at this time. So revenue shortfall, and we need to go out and reduce budgets across the board. And we did that in state government through a curtailment. Those mid-year adjustments, especially at the university system, and quite frankly, any agency, can be really, really challenging. And what we wanted to have, not that we were looking for curtailments, but if they came along, we wanted to have a bucket that we could go to, so that if we got an email from the state on a Monday, we weren't pulling resources immediately back from campuses and dealing with the consequences of that we had a reserve to kind of deal with that cushion. So that was the original reason for the fund. You can see it has an up and down history. Couple of things drive when the balances go down. And so what happened kind of in this window, this 2014 to 2018 window, these were largely campus draws. So this is at a time when the system was supporting kind of USM in this window right here, in Farmington, and probably most of this window right here. We had a couple of other strategic investments that we made from budget stabilization into campuses during this window right here. This one right here represents market conditions. And so, a lot of you who have been on the board for the last couple of years are probably generally spoiled by my investment updates, because they're almost always generally positive. I give you all the cautions in the world, but in general, they've been trending positive over the last couple of years. It's allowed us to make some really positive investments, but to also put funds back into the budget stabilization fund. But this was a window where I was consistently coming back and saying that we had budgeted $2 million this year, and we lost 15 million. Or whatever that number was at the time. So big market drop here. And then last year in the 24-25 window, you'll recall the chancellor came to you at the end of the year and recommended an investment plan that involved YourPace and some AI investments, but it also included a transfer to reserves. And so that transfer to reserves, plus some year-end balances that we had, brought our reserve back up to its current $17 million, highest number that we've had since 2021. I'll mention our philosophy around the budget stabilization fund has been to only use the budget stabilization fund for those fiscal challenges at a campus. it's not where we want to go first. The board talked about the strategic plan about how we wanted balanced budgets, but the concept, especially when we talk to the rating agencies, is that this is here from when we have a genuine rainy day, a crisis. It's not here for we've got a really great idea for this investment that we think could increase enrollment. Those have a place, and that's the operating reserve. Let me just touch on the operating reserve because I didn't have a slide on it. So the operating reserve kind of is in parallel to this. It does not have quite the same kind of robust balance, but our operating reserve as of yesterday-ish was about 12.6 million. And there's a couple of minor small commitments against that, but generally in that 12 to $13 million range. So I'm going to roll from reserves into probably the biggest piece of the presentation, and that is around shared services and governance. So kind of what we think of as the Chancellor's office and HR and IT and finance and all of the components of shared services, and then governance as well. Joan, did you have a question? Okay, so we're going to break this out into 3 buckets, and we're going to talk about each one of them. So what we refer to as the system office, I think when people talk about the system office, what they really mean is governance. But we're going to talk about it kind of big picture. We're going to talk about it in these 3 units. And so first, we've got university services allocated at the top. This is shared services that we provide, and then we charge back to campuses. So think the controller, HR, IT shared infrastructure, et cetera. So this is that traditional kind of view of what shared services is what you see represented in the green. In the blue is university services unallocated. So this is strategic and legislatively funded pass-throughs that serve the system but are not charged back. So a couple of really good examples here. Early college, we get funds directly from state government specific for early college. Adult degree completion is another one. We get funds from the state for the main center. We have strategic investment funds that we take kind of off of the top of the appropriation that kind of fall into that bucket as well. And we'll see examples, and I'll show you that as well. And then finally, the last bucket, which I think is traditionally, typically what you would think of as the Chancellor's office, is the Chancellor, the Vice Chancellors. It's the Chancellor's leadership team and the support staff that support that leadership team. And you'll see specific examples when I move through the slides. So this is, again, shared services staffing. This gives you a good snapshot of how shared services breaks out. It is, you can see roughly 2/3 of it is IT. And then HR, again, you see at 27. Finance and payroll are combined, so they're in that 25. And then facilities and risk are 19, and then you see the others as they fall down through there. One of the biggest changes that we have in shared services is typically you would see in this bucket right here campus finance teams. And so the folks that report jointly to me and to the president, so think all of the CBOs and their offices. Typically, those have been in university services allocated. And so this number a year ago, I want to say was closer to 340 or somewhere up in that range. The change that we made this year, and you're going to see it impacted in some of the numbers as we roll forward, is that we moved the campus services folks. So we moved the people who specifically worked at the campuses, the CBOs and stuff, back to campus budgets. And then we moved appropriation back with them. And so it's a net neutral move. It does not add any costs, but it presents a more transparent picture of of what's going on here. And so, what was happening is we would present university services allocated, and let's say our goal was to have a flat rate. We want to hold rates flat this year. If an individual campus decided that they wanted to make an investment in their HR team or add another person to their finance team, which was great, they'd go through a process and justify that. So assume they get that approval, the cost would then show up over in the system office budget, and would show up as an increase over here. And so in the interest of just full transparency and kind of accurately displaying where the costs were, we shifted those back to the campuses, but we obviously don't charge them for that piece now. So it's a net neutral move, and you're going to see some of the financial impact of that in the slides as I kind of roll forward. So one of the questions that came up during the work session, it came up last year, which is why I had this slide already prepared, is how do we allocate out shared services? And so it is dependent on the topic. And so we offer shared services across a broad variety of categories. You can see in finance, procurement, facilities, human resources, IT, legal, and so on. And we charge each of them slightly different depending on what it is that we're providing to them. So you can imagine for human resources, the amount that you need to do to onboard an employee is not substantially different for a part-time employee versus a full-time employee. You're still doing that same kind of work. And so for that one, the metric that made the most sense was we're gonna base that on your employee headcount, your percentage of headcount as a percentage of the total headcount. For facilities, when we charge that out, we're going to do it based on the square footage of buildings on your campus relative to the system. And then you can follow the same kind of methodology for these other ones. For student services, we're going to use FTE. Finance, we're going to use operating expenses. So this is a model. This is an allocation metric that we've had in place since we implemented shared services in the mid 2012 to 2019 range, and then we've modified it kind of as we've expanded services. Remember, we originally started off in HR and IT were kind of the first two that we consolidated back in the 2012, 2013, 2014 range. And then finance was the last one in 2016, 17 or so. And so this has been a model that we've developed along the way, but this is the metrics that we use to allocate those costs up to the campuses. So I always spend a little bit of time talking. So we're in shared services, and so let's break out unified services. So those services that we provide to all of the campuses versus those ones that are campus specific. And so think IT staff that are specifically assigned to USM, or a piece of software that UMaine purchases and shows up in this bucket right here. So the campus services, again, as it says, are those people or software that exclusively benefit a single campus. This, again, has changed substantially because what you saw down here last year was this included the CBOs and all of their staffs, and so this was a substantially larger number. This piece has stayed about the same. So I'm going to go through the budget of university services allocated, and I'll just hit a couple of kind of key categories, but then happy to answer any kind of questions along the way. I also want to note Miriam is on here with me. Miriam has spent just as much or more time in here, and so definitely want to have her jump in and offer any thoughts that she may have as well on questions. So we do bring in kind of a modest amount of revenue through investment incomes and some sales and services, and we could go over specifics if you're interested. But the biggest kind of source of funds here is in this middle line right here. And so this, sorry, I went backwards, my bad. trigger happy. You can see the biggest line here is shared services. That is $52 million worth of chargebacks that are going to come in to support the expense side of this budget. You can also see right here the difference between last year and this year. That is driven entirely by the CBOs and that piece and the campus IT piece moving back to the campuses. A couple of other key things I'll mention. You can see overall, most of the costs are down here. So travel is down 10%. What is really going on here is the travel that CBOs had just moved back to their budgets. And so it was in the system allocated budget. And so it moved back to the campus. The regular travel that's part of the allocated group stays here. But you can see there was about 16,000 that was travel associated with that before that kind of moved back to campus budgets. And you saw all of these when you saw the individual campuses. You'll remember several times folks talked about these numbers being up at the campus level. And again, that was because these costs were coming back to them. The other big line that I want to mention on this one, because it drives, even though we have a decrease because we moved out the CBOs. There's increased costs here as 4% salary increases are coming in. But one of the biggest drivers of the increase in 27 over 26, again, it's not literally an increase, but it's this line right here, unassigned budget. Last year, we came to you and worked with Robert and presidents and the CBOs, and we had an initiative that would reduce our overall software budget, our software spend by about $1 million. That was our goal to kind of control shared service increases last year. That effort did not materialize. We had several starts and stops along the way. We had really great conversations, but you can imagine just imagine a bucket where there's 10 pieces of software in it, and every campus is willing to give up one piece of software, but everyone else also has that software on their list. And so it's great if we get rid of that one because I'm not using it, and then in other campuses I'm using that one, but you can get rid of this one. And so we're not giving up on that one yet. I'm sure people are going to be frustrated when they hear me say that, but we're going to bring this one back again and start that conversation again. We do think there are opportunities in the software space for reductions, and we're going to continue that. We didn't build it into our base budget in 2027. I think we learned our lesson in 26, but we are going to push that. And if we're able to achieve savings, it only adds to the bottom line. The next bucket is university services governance, and so governance, 25 positions. I think it's flat to where it was last year. Again, you see the breakdown of staff versus chancellor's office and senior leadership. That number has stayed fairly steady over the last, say, 5 or 6 years. I think it's been as high as 27, maybe as low as 23 or 24, settled in at 25 for the last couple of years. So governance, a couple things about governance. So governance is funded through state appropriation. So it comes immediately off the top of state appropriation. For historical reference, we've covered governance that way for a while, but we used to cover the whole bucket, shared services, all of that through state appropriation. We just kind of took it. We took it off the top and then at the end, if the system had extra money, we would just roll it over and into the next year. Starting in, I want to say 2012, 13, 14, we went to kind of a new methodology for shared services where we went to this chargeback method, and we felt like it was more transparent. We also felt like it was better for the campuses. If we're going to charge the campuses, so let's say we charge the campuses for $45 million in shared services, but through attrition and vacancies and canceled projects, we only spend 44. we wanted to be able to return those dollars back to the campuses. And so that's what we do. We make estimates here of what we're going to charge the campuses based on people and projects. And if we spend less, then we refund those dollars back to the campus. So you'll see it is an increase. Sorry, an increase from 26 into 27 of about 400,000. Again, most of that driven by the 4% across the board pay increases. The other big one that's driving this, and so you're going to see if you flash down here, you can see there's about a $200,000 increase on the expense side. Again, almost all of that driven by another case of last year. The budget was originally projected to be about 7.5 million. We did not want to pass that increase onto the campuses last year. We knew that we had campuses that were struggling. And so we put a target in our budget to achieve of about 239,000. Throughout the course of the year, we were able to cobble together dollars and achieve that. So we did achieve the budget. But we didn't, all of these kind of dollars were mostly one time. And so they didn't roll forward. We didn't include that initiative again. You can see if we did, the budget would be almost about the same size in governance. But again, we didn't roll that initiative forward. University services unallocated. So again, recall this is the bucket that's going to fund strategic initiatives, legislative appropriations, like early college, these items that we have identified as having a system-wide impact. The other source of revenue outside of legislative appropriations is in the past has been the percentage that we take off the top of the appropriation. So history for some of our newer members, when we changed the allocation formula for the first time in almost 50 years, or substantively changed it for the first time in almost 50 years, we needed to we had a couple of campuses at that time, Presque Isle, Fort Kent, and Machias, that we had identified as part of our unified budget exercise that were dramatically underfunded relative to other campuses. And so we implemented the new funding formula that you're aware of, that we've had in place up until last year. But we didn't want to start off the funding formula with these three campuses that we knew were well below kind of the baseline that we had established as a reasonable amount of appropriation. And so what the trustees did, maybe 2019 or 2020, was they used $3 million of system reserves and seeded $1 million to each of those three campuses that we added straight into their budget. So they started kind of more on the kind of level playing field before we started adding appropriation to that. And the price for that $3 million, the trustees decided at the time, was that the trustees at the time wanted some resources to be able to invest in strategic initiatives that come along, like some of the ones that you're going to see on the next slide. And so what they said was, anytime that there's new appropriation, we want to take 30% off the top of that appropriation. So we get a $10 million appropriation, and we're going to carve off $3 million. And this is overly simplistic because there's, governance and things that come off the top. But just imagine my simple example. And so we've got 10 million, 3 million gets set aside for strategic initiatives, 7 million gets distributed to the campus. And those strategic initiatives over the years have been things like, we didn't have an IR team at the system office for the longest time. And so we made the decision collectively, we proposed and you accepted a proposal to establish an IR team in now Vice Chancellor St. John's office. And the funds came from this. And so we transfer those every year because we thought that was something that made sense. It had a system-wide lens. And so it made sense for this kind of appropriation. So that's the type of things that you're going to see in this bucket. They are not necessarily new initiatives. In fact, nearly everything on this list has been decided in previous budgets. We just continue to see as a priority, and so it rolls forward. So I'm not going to touch on all of these, but let me talk about a few of them. Institutional research is the example that I just mentioned. It was one of the very first ones that we funded, 508,000 that we transfer over at the end of the year to help make Jeff's budget whole. The ones with the asterisk next to them, so adult degree completion, early college, interpersonal violence prevention, and I feel like I'm missing one more, maybe adult degree completion at the top. Those are ones that are funded by legislative appropriation. So the legislature has made the decision. We put in a request quite a while ago for adult degree completion funds, for instance, or early college fund, and those come as a direct appropriation to the university for a specific purpose. Couple of other buckets, system-wide marketing. Again, you'll remember just a few years ago, we were having lots of conversations about marketing at the system level versus the campuses. We didn't have any funds at the system level. And so we made a decision a few years ago, maybe this is like our third or fourth year now, where we would allocate out $750,000 a year to the system office for marketing to support, the Blaze work and all the things that Carolyn and Jen and others have been briefing you on for the last several months. Main center operations. So I know I had a specific question about this one, so let me touch on this one. So we get a dedicated appropriation that helps us cover facilities costs. We've got that back in several budgets ago. I'm really grateful for that support. And then main center operations is a combination of we support the main center with 400,000 of E&G funds, and then the main center has a couple of other revenue sources, things like the professional development courses, the AI courses that I teach. Those generate a modest amount of revenue. Those flow into this bucket, and other kind of programs like that the main center has. Maybe I'll just randomly pick up a couple of more. Capital planning. So capital planning is one, I think maybe we made the decision about 3 years ago where this one, I'd say we're a victim of our own success in this line right here. So what happened was we started doing really, really well with congressionally directed spending. We started doing really, really well advocating to the legislature for facilities bond or facilities debt service to help us support renovations at our dorms, all of those kind of things. And we started to generate far more projects. And so the capital planning team had to get bigger. And we didn't, and sometimes you can get bigger and you assign things off to projects, and sometimes you can't assign it off to a project. And so at that time, we were concerned about passing on $1.3 million worth of cost to the campuses to support the infrastructure build that was going on. And so instead, we recommended, and you approved, that we transfer up to, and I want to really focus on that, up to 1.3 million to capital planning. So this is Nate Harris's shop. And so with this item, and quite frankly, with a lot of these items where we reimburse, we wait till the end of the year. We see what is needed to make that group whole, and then only then do we transfer the dollars. And so we've had this in the budget for 3 years. We've never transferred the full amount because there's always attrition, there's always things like that. Projects get moved from one fiscal year to another, but that's what this 1.39 represents. And then I'll touch on maybe strategic investment fund. So that the biggest piece of that is two buckets. One is the research reinvestment fund. So the Research Reinvestment Fund is an initiative that operates out of the University of Maine and Joan's team with a system-wide impact. It's been in place for probably maybe 10 years now, some 10, maybe 8 to 10 years, just before Chancellor Malloy got here. The kind of the next biggest bucket of that is the demolition fund. So also, again, an initiative that we brought forward probably 6 or 7 years ago. We'd had lots of conversations, as we continue to have, about excess space across the system, but didn't have a funding source. And so several years ago, we started setting aside $850,000 a year for demolition. And we used that through a combination of saving it up until we've got enough saved up to do a big project, or we've done a bunch of small projects. And so right now we have a lot of that on hold. We presented a plan to this committee a while ago that in that scenario we showed you a balance of upwards of $10 million and how we would allocate that out. A piece of that revenue was the assumption that there would be another $850,000 from 2027. I think the last one I'll touch on, just because it's a really big number, is capital investments, and this is really just the system office's share of depreciation. And so this is largely IT. It's things like capital investments in the IT space. It's a little bit of some of the renovations that we're doing or plan doing at the main center are going to increase our depreciation total as well. And so that's the number that's reflected right there. And I'll come back and happy to answer any questions on that or any of the other ones as we roll forward. So state appropriation, this one feels more complicated than it is. And so let me walk you down through how state appropriation works. So we have a base of $261 million we get from the state. I could spend 15 minutes thanking state government, our friends on both sides of the aisle, the governor, the legislature, for the consistent support that we've received over the last several years. This $12 million increase is the largest kind of annual increase that we've had in appropriation ever. And so really, really grateful for that. So we're starting off with a $12 million increase in 27. You'll recall that we had paid family medical leave. And so we had a dedicated appropriation for that of about $2 million. So again, that was not meant for campus distribution. That was right off the top. And so that gives us about 9.6 million then is left to distribute. And about, you can see, so if I show you the 10 here and I show you the 6 down here, you can see that about 4 million is going to go to different places along the way. And so there's our 2 million from paid family medical leave. Here's the 30% that comes off the top of new appropriation. So that's about 3 million. And so you're going to see that work its way through the math. And then we added 4% to the traditional lines where we get appropriation. So adult degree completion, early college, those lines, the violence prevention line, all got those same kind of modest 4% increases. And so that's what brings you over to these numbers. Governance gets a 4% increase. And then Maine law, we've talked about it before, but Maine law we've handled outside of the allocation model that we created a number of years ago, mostly because I just couldn't find another animal that looked like Maine law, quite frankly. We couldn't find one where you have a law school that exists in a system that is a little bit hybrid because they get some services from USM, and so anyway, it was a weird mix, and we really struggled, despite a lot of effort to identify peers. And so instead, we worked with the dean and some historical data and kind of set a target for what we thought the appropriation should be. When we started this in 2019, I think it was, the law school was getting 865,000. And so we've modestly increased that over the years. And you can see we're approaching that $5.5 million number. So that leaves about 6.1 million then that would drop down to the campuses. And again, as a reminder, in 2017, 2018, we did create a new funding formula and had that in place for 6 years or so. Last year, we made the decision to move away from that formula. Not because the formula didn't do what we wanted, it did exactly what we wanted, which was to get the campuses up to what felt like an adequate baseline. But it was never meant to go beyond that. And so once we got up to that baseline, it had kind of outlived its usefulness. And so last year and then this year, we're thinking about as transition years as we think about, what the next funding model for the system would look like. And so what you see in this column right here is the campus's share of the overall allocation as of last year after all of the changes and stuff. So, of the total bucket, UMaine was getting about 50% of that, USM about 24%, and then you can see the other allocations here. And that's just how the math works. You can see you take the 6,093, multiply it by this, and that gets you to the 3,000,002. And that's how the math works for that one. And then again, you can see how that's distributed. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to flip through that so fast. We are having conversations with the CBOs about what another funding model might look like. That is always a kind of a multi-year process, and so I'd expect we'll have more conversations. I think we probably want to have more conversations with the FFT committee. And get some feedback from this committee, from the board in general. But that is the distribution methodology for 2027. I'm going to keep rolling. So we had a great question. I think Trustee Alexander asked this question and about has our appropriation kept pace with CPI? I knew the answer at the time because we've had this in our slide deck for a while. We just forgot to put it in this year. So you can see the answer right here. We've obviously lost progress. So this is what that picture is. It would be great to have an additional $500 million that had rolled into the university over the last several years. But I'm grateful for the support that we did receive. And so I think this is a good little factoid to show how the appropriation has struggled to keep up with CPI. We see that every year. We're incredibly grateful for a 4% increase in appropriation, but our costs go up 5 and 6%. And so unless we increase tuition at the same exact time, then we're always starting behind. So I think this is a good viewpoint of what's been happening, but I don't want anyone to think that we're not grateful for the support that we have, because we are incredibly, incredibly grateful for that support, especially when you compare it to what some of our peers have experienced. So credit hour profiles by institution. So a couple of things about credit hours. So you asked as well about the enrollment projection methodology. And so I put this little snapshot in here that we worked with Jeff's office and Bob Zerker and the great team that Jeff has in IR to develop this kind of quick snapshot. We've got more information. Bob and his team have done presentations in the past that are much more thorough than this. So if you do want to deep dive sometime about that enrollment projection piece, I think that's something we could probably add to an FFT future agenda. But really what's going on here, and I won't go through all the blocks, but it's really looking at historical trends. And then it's looking at behavior based on credit hour progress. And so it's completely logical that you would imagine that, somebody who is in the first year or so of their undergraduate education, who is in that 0 to 29 credit hour window, is going to behave or is going to retain completely different than somebody who's got 90 credit hours. You don't see many people drop out when they've got 90, 95, 100 credit hours. And so they take these credit hour bands, 0 to 29, 30 to 59, 60 to 90, or and then so on. See what the historical patterns have been with those groups, and then apply those going forward. So that's how you can see continuing students, and then you can see the way they calculate other pieces as well. Summer term is a percentage of fall credit hours, and again, no surprise. I've talked about this before. What we found is that this is a better methodology than what we had before. I mean, what we had before was this kind of, I don't know if I want to call it warped, but this, we're asking, the people who are in charge of going out and recruiting students to tell us how many you're going to get. And so tell me if you're in that position and you're out there actively recruiting and you're doing all you can, how likely are you going to be to come back and say, yeah, we've done a great job this year. It looks like we're going to have about a 4% decline in enrollment. Nobody wants to do that. That's putting people in a really uncomfortable position. And quite frankly, that's what we did for a number of years at this system. We would all collectively know that enrollment was going to go down because it had gone down 3 years before consecutively every year. And yet we would take 7 or 8 individual campus enrollment projections and stack them on top of each other and add them up, and suddenly we were projecting 3% increases. And so we needed to do something different. And I think we threaded the needle really, really well, which is this combination of the system using historical trend data to reach out to the campus and say, hey, University of Maine at Fort Kent, here's what we see as your enrollment for the upcoming year. And then we give Fort Kent the opportunity to look at that and say, yeah, this makes sense. Or we added this new graduate program last year that you don't have in your calculations. And so therefore, we think the enrollment is actually going to be a little bit higher, and here's why. And then, again, if you sat through those March budget presentations, you saw every campus had one of those sheets where they had the what they referred to as the Placido chart on the left that had the enrollment numbers, and then the places on the right where they had made modifications to those. And again, as I mentioned in March, this was our second consecutive year where we didn't have to make budget adjustments after the fall census. And so I think we've got a really good method for projecting our enrollment based on some trial and error and some really good work by Rob Placido, by Jeff and the IR team, and then Miriam and the team here at the system. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these last few remaining slides. I'm just going to really kind of give you a snapshot of what you're looking at, and kind of what our definitions were for some of these terms. So here's the University of Maine. All of these are, we'll start with the total head count. Then we'll take that head count and we'll divide it. And we're gonna put it in an in-person bucket and an online bucket. And the definition of in-person is you're taking at least one class in person. So I can be a full-time student and I'm taking 4 or 5 classes. One of them is online. I'm going to be, or all of them are online, but one, I'm going to still be in the in-person bucket. We had to come up with some kind of definition. That's the one that makes sense, because when we typically talk about this as a category, what we're doing is we're talking about on-campus traffic and things like that. And if this person is taking at least one class, then they are coming in, they're probably taking advantage of financial aid services and library and maybe the rec center and things like that. And so we drop them in the in-person bucket. The online group is, again, exclusively online. And then of the 10,656 headcount that are enrolled, how many of them are in on-campus housing? And that's the number that you're going to get over here on the far right. Oops, sorry, went too fast there. The rest of the chart is some of the other information that you asked for. So full-time versus part-time percentages. You'll see those here. The instructional mode is just repeating what you saw up here. And then housing status, again, is really just a repeat of this number here in a cool bar chart. 4-year headcount totals. Again, you can see that. You can see some trending information, and then that information against the system metrics as well. And you have that same information in your packet for each of the individual campuses. So again, I'll just kind of flip through. I won't go through all the numbers, but you can see we're at UMA now. So we've got 3,200 students, but as you know, not a lot of beds at UMA. So we've got 102 over there, about 3%. You can see the shift. Now we've got 75% online, about 25% of UMA's population is taking at least one class in person. Here's Farmington again. So you see this residential profile that you also saw kind of when we were at UMaine. This 82-18 split, about 41% of the campus in housing, and you can see, as you would expect, largely a full-time in-person population. Trending better at Farmington, both in headcount, in person, and housing. So again, consistent with kind of the positive trending stories at UMF, not all the way closing that gap because the gap was really, really large when we were back here, but certainly trending in a positive direction. And we've seen that on the auxiliary side of the Farmington budget as well. Here is Fort Kent. So again, a decent split. You can see about a 41-59 split in person and online. About 20% of the campus has housing. Here's Presque Isle, and so you can imagine if I had done this chart of Presque Isle just 2 years ago, 3 years ago, quite frankly, even last year, it would look dramatically different. Massive increases in headcount. You can see we've gone from 1,500 up to 4,100, 18% or 741 in person. This number has probably stayed the same over the last 5 or 6 years, just the percentage is coming down as this grows. About 82% online, and you can see about 4% of the campus in housing, but really a bigger share because it's really, you should be really thinking about it as 170 of the 741 are in campus housing. And then you can see down here, full-time or part-time, we have almost an exact split, almost a 50-50 split here. And then, again, housing and instructional are just repeating what was up here. And then you see these numbers as well against system totals. And then last one is USM. You can see headcount is up at about 6,300, about 27% living in campus, on campus, and you see that 69-31 split between in-person and online. This shows you the 4-year trends and then comparisons against system average. I'll mention. That was my last slide. So I'll mention as well that what you didn't see there was a Maine law slide. And that's because when we started that, exercise, we were asked to divide out online versus in person, and of the total headcount, what is in housing. So that was the original purpose of those 2 slides. So we didn't have Maine law in there. I think next year, because we've added a few new things in there, we'll probably put Maine law in there and kind of duplicate that slide and then just leave out the things that aren't relevant or remind you that they're 100% full-time or whatever, or that no one's in housing or whatever those characteristics are. So, Mr. Chair, I think that's all the slides that I prepared. Hopefully, I was responsive to the questions that you got, and happy with my cast of characters that I see on the screen to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, thanks for a great presentation. It's a lot to digest, and I'm sure and thank you again to your team for the slides you produced. Really, really helpful. Questions? We have some time, but Trustee Alexander, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. One question and then a bigger question, a short one. At one point in the presentation, you were saying that a student was considered in person if they had at least one course in person among the credit hours that they were taking. Was that definition used in the slides we just saw? Or was that actual online hours versus in-person hours?
No, that was used in the slides that we just did.
Which one?
Yeah, so that last set of 6 slides that I showed you with each of the individual campuses, the definition of online there was exclusively online.
Ah, okay. So we really don't have a total good picture of the percentage of hours spent online by our students versus in person. And I think that would be useful to know, if it's possible to know that.
I think we could get that snapshot. We needed to come up with a definition to create a slide. And so that was as the reason I said, because we were trying to think of campus traffic. But to your point, we can, I think, unless Jeff tells me wrong, I think we can slice that data like that.
Yeah.
So happy to prepare that and we'll distribute it maybe in advance of the.
And that would be important for other purposes for the board
100%.
as well,
Yep.
going forward with policies. Let me ask my second question, if I might. Without any criticism of the incredible work done here, the kind of information presented, I just wanted to ask a very 30,000-foot question. We know that the assumptions for the forthcoming budgets reflect certain things that we know are not definitive in terms of enrollment. We've projected it. State appropriations, we projected it. The need to properly fund our staff and our good quality faculty. And we don't know the results of what will happen with those bargaining activities. So the criteria for thinking through what will happen or where the levers are if some things happen that we're not projecting. Am I right that what we're talking about is a set of university-specific changes in their operations, maybe reducing expenses, coming to the board or the university system for help, and in what order would that occur? Among the various funds that you described, for which there's some discretionary use, how would those be allocated and in what order? I'm more interested in coming to grips with the university-specific changes that might be required, and what your view, what the system's view is as to whether that's the top priority first generation approach that should be used. Thank you.
Okay, so let me just make sure I got all this. First of all, you're absolutely right. Every budget here or everywhere is always going to be a set of assumptions because it hasn't happened yet. So I'm confident in the assumptions that we made for all the reasons that I've said throughout the presentation. I think we've refined them over the years, but that does not mean, I've learned this in my 30 years, doesn't mean they can't go sideways. I've definitely experienced projections that were super sound and based on the best logic on the planet, and then go sideways. And so if that, let's pretend that happens. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be something like where we wake up on the day before census and realize, oh my God, enrollment's off by 25%.
I see.
And so we track that literally every day. And so we'll start to see if those gaps emerge, and we'll be having conversations, all throughout the summer and so on. And then what we do is that we maybe 4 years ago, we set in place this kind of formal process where if the campuses need to make those kind of changes, what was happening before this process is they would just figure it out along the way. So let's say Fort Kent doesn't meet their enrollment projection. It's clear that they're going to be about $1 million short. Kind of historically, what we would do is we just manage that. The campus would just figure it out as they went along. And what we put in place a number of years ago, because again, we were uncomfortable with that process, was this formal process in October, where we come forward at that October board meeting and we make budget revisions to the campuses. And so we come and we say that, enrollment didn't work out like we thought at 3 campuses. And two of them have $500,000 shortfalls, and somebody's got $1 million shortfall. And then here's our solutions for fixing that. And so the past practice over recent years has been that the campuses resolve that gap. And so that's the first pass. And so they're my Fort Kent example, they're 500,000 short. They do everything within their possibility to get that budget back into balance. That's the responsibility of the campuses as part of the board's strategic plan. That's where we want them to start. And then the system would only, we're going to work through that whole process. We're going to help them out. We would only step in. If I understood your question, when does the system step in and say, here's our support? It would only be, I think, it would be a lot of conversations between me and the chancellor and the leadership team, and then we'd have lots of board conversations, I suspect. But it would have to be something like, something unusual. It would have to be a situation like a few years ago, we recommended an investment at Farmington because we knew what their reserve situation looked like. We knew that they didn't have a lot of options on the table, and we felt like making additional cuts at that time didn't make sense. And so here's what we would recommend to kind of bridge this short-term gap. So that would be the kind of scenario. It's unlikely. I can't imagine a scenario where we would come to you and say, I'll pick on Jen since she's right in the middle of my screen, that, we want $1 million to help UMA solve their budget gap because UMA's got they've got really healthy reserves as for an institution of their size. And so that would be a place where we would say, yeah, we acknowledge there's a gap there. You should apply your reserves there. And then we go through all the permission steps that, that were required. Mm-hmm. All of those moves, any funds from budget stabilization, all of those require board approval. And so we always will bring those to you and have conversations about them. It's obviously our strong preference that we're not kind of routinely throwing out, extra dollars. We want to build that balance up much higher than it is right now, maybe in the 30, 40, $50 million range. But going to the system reserves would not be the first place we would go.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Miriam?
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on your question, Trustee Alexander, about the headcount. Our tracking is all done of credit hours. So our normal budget presentations would show the number of credit hours online or the subscriptions that are your pace or by default the credit hours that aren't online. What makes this exercise a little bit more difficult or different is that the question was about headcount. So when we have a headcount of one student, we have to put them in one bucket or the other in order to do this particular presentation. But our normal presentations always presented in credit hours, which much more clearly, which really addresses the question that you had.
Right. And I can imagine the use for both options for different purposes.
Miriam, following up on that, would it be difficult, and tell me how difficult, to to take a look. You've defined on campus or in person as one course. How difficult would it be to give us the same materials, but the definition being 2 courses and 3 courses, so we could get a better sense of the mix? Is that easy to accomplish or not?
It would have to be something that our internal IR folks would have to take a look at. It's not data that we necessarily have in finance. So I don't know, Ryan or Jeff.
I'd have to have a couple conversations about that, Roger,
Okay.
to figure out if we could disaggregate and then anonymize student course enrollment activity and then build a breakout along the lines of what you're asking for.
Yeah, let's talk about it again. If it's a huge project, I would draw my question, but
Yeah, right now we operate exactly as Miriam described. We've got a head count path and we have a credit hour path, and this would be splitting the atom. But I'll come back to you on this.
thanks. Trish, Chair Riley.
Thank you. Good presentation. I had 2 little questions. One around, because I'm looking at Gretchen and I'm thinking about our interest in residential halls and the deferred maintenance there. I think it would be helpful on that chart, Ryan, and you mentioned it, instead of taking the number of housed students as a percent of the total, to take them as a percent of the in-person, even recognizing that there's a mix of people. I just think it'd be more accurate and probably helpful as we think about where we should invest in residence halls, if we should invest in residence halls. So I think that's a little tweak that would be useful. I wanted to go back to governance, which is complicated business, I know. So the 300, you showed us 341 staff in 2 buckets. Isn't there a 3rd bucket? I thought we talked about possibly a few more people.
So there's two buckets. I mean, there's the 316, and then the 325. I mean, excuse me, the 316, then the 25 in governance. And then the other bucket, the other people that were in that bucket before were the CBOs, and they went back to the campus.
I thought there was some unallocated staff in the system office, but
the only unallocated staff in the system office is, correct me if I'm wrong, Miriam, is legal. We have legal in the unallocated bucket, but I don't think we have anyone.
And we also have IR.
Oh yeah, IR, yeah.
It'd be useful information to have that as well, and maybe in deference to Chair Cates, maybe the full legal costs in our staff and contractors.
Yep, absolutely. We'll put together another packet of information based on these questions, and we'll get that out to you right away.
Thank you. Other questions? Ryan,
you have Trustee Johnson.
Oh, I'm sorry, Heather, Trustee Johnson. Thank you.
Sorry. So I couldn't tell, and you might have said this, but I was reading the documents and listening at the same time. So if you said this, I apologize. But as you think about this kind of percentage that goes out per credit hour, the cost to deliver credit hours aren't the same by program or the same by modality. But that's a huge layer of complexity. Is that something, do you charge different shared services costs based on modality or no?
No.
Okay.
The shared services are all based on those metrics that are in that chart. I don't have it right in front of me, but student services.
Yeah. Okay.
Now those costs may differ. If you're a campus and you're delivering those, then those costs are different and they'll be reflected in campus budgets, but maybe not in the system part of the budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Lot to digest. I am not seeing any. Ryan, thank you very, very much. We have still some time for additional questions, but I'm just not seeing any. Other issues people would like to raise? Other general questions people would like to ask while we were all together this morning? I'm not seeing any hands. If not, Ryan, any need to go into executive session from your perspective this morning?
We do have one item that I need to
Okay.
update you on.
All right. Before we do that, any other questions people have? Last chance. Seeing none, then why don't I'll make a motion to go into executive session in just a moment. When we come out of executive session, we'll just be adjourning. So no need for folks to stick around if you're not part of the executive session. So could I have a motion for the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee of the Board of Trustees to go into executive session under the provisions of 1 MRSA Section 405-6A to discuss the evaluation of personnel and the consideration and discussion of appointments, evaluations, employment, and duties?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Trustee Flood and seconded by Trustee Kane. Beth, could you take the roll call vote, please?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
Trustee Riley,
Yes.
Trustee Kane,
Yes.
Trustee Flood,
Yes.
Trustee Michaud,
Yes.
Trustee McMahon,
Yes.
Trustee Johnson,
Yes.
Trustee Alexander.
Yes.
I'll move you into executive session.
Thank you.